The doctors at New York's Presbyterian Hospital had officially given up. Julian Thorne, the sole heir to a $40 billion real estate empire, was slowly dying of starvation, and it wasn't because of a lack of food. It was because he refused to swallow a single bite. Every Michelin star chef in Manhattan had tried and failed. They brought him truffles, wagyu, and gold leaf risottos, but he threw them all at the wall, screaming that it was poison. But then, a girl named Lana, a waitress who barely had $10 in her bank account, walked into the restricted kitchen. She didn't cook him a banquet. She cooked him a memory. And that single bite didn't just save a life. It exposed a deadly family secret that would shake the city to its core. The silence inside the penthouse suite of the Obsidian Plaza Hotel was heavier than the velvet curtains that blocked out the Manhattan skyline. The air smelled of antiseptic and expensive despair. Davis Thorne, a man whose name could drop the stock market by 10 points with a single frown, looked older than his 55 years. He stood by the window, his reflection ghostly against the glass, watching the rain batter Central Park. Behind him, a team of 3 specialists from Switzerland packed their bags in quiet defeat. "Mr. Thorne," Dr. Alistair Sterling said, his voice low and apologetic, "we have tried everything. Intravenous fluids can keep his organs functioning for a while longer, but the psychological block is absolute. Julian isn't just refusing food. His body is rejecting the very concept of sustenance. He believes, truly believes, that everything is contaminated." Davis turned. His eyes, usually cold steel, were red-rimmed. "He is 22 years old, Alistair. He was an athlete, a scholar, and now he looks like a skeleton. You're telling me that with all my money, I cannot buy my son a hunger?" "Trauma is a powerful thing," the doctor replied, snapping his briefcase shut. "Ever since the poisoning attempt at the gala last month, Julian's mind has associated food with death. Unless he voluntarily eats and enjoys it, his body will eventually shut down from the stress alone. He needs comfort, not nutrition. But he trusts no one." Davis looked toward the bedroom door, which was guarded by 2 large security operatives. Inside lay Julian Thorne. Just 6 weeks ago, Julian had been the most eligible bachelor in New York, a vibrant young man expected to take over Thorne Enterprises. Now he was a shadow, gaunt and shivering, his eyes wild with paranoia. The poisoning had been sophisticated, ricin laced into a glass of champagne. He had survived by a miracle, but his mind hadn't recovered. He was convinced the assassin was still close. He was convinced the assassin was in the kitchen. "Get out," Davis whispered. "Mr. Thorne, I said get out!" Davis roared, his voice cracking. "If you can't save him, you are useless to me." As the doctors scurried out, Davis picked up his phone. He dialed the number for the hotel's general manager. "Send up the head chef," Davis commanded, "and tell him if he doesn't prepare a meal, my son will eat within the hour. I will buy this hotel just to fire him." Down in the bowels of the hotel, the kitchen was a war zone. Gordon Vance, a celebrity chef known as much for his temper as his beef Wellington, was throwing pans. "He rejected the lobster thermidor. He rejected the foie gras," Vance screamed, his face turning purple. He wiped sweat from his forehead with a rag that cost more than most people's shirts. "What does this brat want? I am a 3-star Michelin chef, not a babysitter." In the corner of the kitchen, trying to make herself invisible near the dishwashing station, was Lana Ross. Lana was 23, with hair the color of roasted chestnuts, tied back in a messy bun, and a uniform that was slightly too big for her slender frame. She wasn't a chef. She wasn't even a sous chef. She was a waitress, currently demoted to polishing silverware because she had accidentally spilled water on a VIP guest the day before. Lana had problems of her own. Her mother was in a care facility in Queens, suffering from early-onset dementia, and the bills were piling up on her kitchen counter like snowdrifts. She needed this job. She needed the overtime. She watched as Chef Vance frantically began chopping truffles for a risotto. "He won't eat that," Lana whispered to herself. Beside her, a busboy named Marco nudged her. "Shh, Vance is on a warpath. If he hears you, you're fired." "But he won't," Lana insisted quietly, her eyes fixed on the frantic chef. "The boy, Julian, he's scared. You don't feed a scared animal rich, heavy food. You don't give a poisoning victim truffles. The smell alone is too overpowering. It triggers the nausea." "And what would you know about it, silverware girl?" Marco rolled his eyes. Lana looked down at the fork she was polishing. She knew because she had spent the last 3 years cooking for her mother, trying to get a confused, frightened woman to eat when she didn't recognize the spoon in her hand. She knew that when the mind is broken, the stomach doesn't want luxury. It wants safety. "Chef!" The doors swung open. It was Davis Thorne's personal assistant, a woman named Sarah who looked like she hadn't slept in a week. "Mr. Thorne is waiting. He says if the next plate comes back untouched, heads will roll." Vance plated the black truffle risotto with trembling hands. "This is perfection," he declared, though his voice wavered. "Take it up." Lana watched the silver cloche cover the dish. She felt a knot in her stomach. She knew, with absolute certainty, that the plate would come back down in 10 minutes, untouched. And she knew that Julian Thorne was running out of time. 20 minutes later, the elevator doors chimed. The kitchen went silent. Sarah walked out, holding the silver tray. She didn't say a word. She just set it down on the stainless steel pass. The cloche was removed. The risotto was splattered across the inside of the lid. It hadn't been tasted. It had been thrown. "He screamed," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "He said it smelled like chemicals. He threw a lamp at his father." Chef Vance slumped against the counter, defeated. "I can't do this. I quit. I'm not going to ruin my reputation over a lunatic junkie." "He's not a junkie," Sarah snapped. "He's dying of trauma." "I don't care." Vance untied his apron and threw it on the floor. "I'm done. The kitchen is closed." Chaos erupted. The sous chefs looked at each other in panic. If Vance walked out, the kitchen would stall. The general manager would fire everyone. Lana stood frozen. She thought of her mother's medical bills. She thought of the young man upstairs, starving in a room full of gold. She remembered reading about Julian in the papers before the accident. He had been kind, known for funding animal shelters and libraries. He wasn't the monster everyone described. He was just a boy who had lost his trust in the world. She looked at the clock. It was 11 p.m. The shift was technically over. Vance was storming out the back door. The sous chefs were arguing. Lana put down the silverware. She walked past the dish pit. She walked past the line cooks. She walked straight to the private prep station that Vance had just abandoned. "Hey, Lana! What are you doing?" Marco hissed. "I'm going to cook," Lana said. Her voice was quiet, but her hands were steady. "Are you crazy? You're a waitress. You can't touch the station." "There's no one else, Marco," Lana said, tying a clean apron around her waist. "And I'm not going to let that boy die because of a chef's ego." "You're going to get us all fired," Marco groaned, but he didn't stop her. Lana looked at the ingredients Vance had left out. Foie gras, caviar, heavy creams. She pushed them all aside. She opened the walk-in fridge and bypassed the expensive imports. She went to the back, to the employee section. She grabbed 3 simple things: a basket of organic heirloom tomatoes, a bunch of fresh basil, a loaf of sourdough bread, baked that morning. "What are you making?" Sarah, the assistant, had lingered in the kitchen, watching this strange waitress take command. "He won't eat peasant food." "He won't eat food," Lana corrected, grabbing a heavy-bottomed pot. "He needs medicine for his soul. He needs to know nobody is trying to trick him." Lana worked quickly. She didn't use complex techniques. She blanched the tomatoes, peeling the skins with a gentle rhythm. She sautéed garlic in olive oil. Not too much, just enough to scent the air. She didn't use heavy chicken stock. She used vegetable broth she made on the spot, light and clean. She simmered the tomatoes until they broke down into a vibrant red slush, then hand-milled them. It wasn't a puree, it had texture. It looked like something a grandmother would make on a rainy Tuesday. Then, the bread. She cut thick slices of sourdough. She buttered them lightly and placed a slice of sharp white cheddar and a slice of Gruyere between them. She grilled the sandwich on a cast-iron skillet until it was golden brown and the cheese was oozing out the sides, crispy and caramelized. She cut the sandwich into 4 triangles. She poured the soup into a plain white bowl, no gold rim. She placed a single fresh basil leaf on top. The smell wafted through the kitchen. It didn't smell like a 5-star hotel. It smelled like safety. It smelled like a rainy day when you were a child and didn't have to go to school. Sarah stared at the tray. "Grilled cheese and tomato soup? You want me to take a grilled cheese to the heir of the Thorne family?" "Tell him." Lana hesitated. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Tell him the chef who made this doesn't care about his money. Tell him I just want him to feel warm." Sarah looked at Lana, really looked at her, for the first time. She saw the determination in the waitress's hazel eyes. "What's your name?" Sarah asked. "Lana." "All right, Lana," Sarah sighed, picking up the tray. "If he fires me, I'm blaming you." The elevator ride up to the penthouse felt like a funeral procession. Sarah's hands trembled as she held the tray. The smell of the toasted cheese and acidic tomato was intoxicating, even to her, but she feared Davis Thorne's wrath. When the doors opened, the atmosphere in the suite had worsened. Julian was curled in the corner of the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, shivering violently. Davis was on the phone, screaming at a lawyer to draft a will. Davis slammed the phone down when he saw Sarah. "I told you, no more. He is exhausted." "Sir," Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper, "please, one last try. It's different." Julian raised his head. His eyes were sunken, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. He looked like a haunted painting. He smelled the air. His nose twitched. It wasn't the cloying, metallic scent of truffle oil. It wasn't the heavy, fatty smell of steak. It was sharp, acidic, yeasty. It smelled like the kitchen in his childhood summer home in the Hamptons before his mother died. Before the money ruined everything. "What is that?" Julian's voice was a dry rasp. Sarah stepped forward and placed the tray on the low coffee table. She didn't take the cover off with a flourish. She just left it there. "It's tomato soup, Julian," Sarah said softly, "and a grilled cheese sandwich." Davis looked furious. "Is this a joke? I pay millions for this room and you bring him diner food?" He moved to swipe the tray off the table. "No," Julian croaked. He reached out a thin, trembling hand. "Wait." Davis froze. Julian sat up slowly. He looked at the bowl. It was simple. Red. Steam curled off the top in lazy ribbons. There was no foam, no garnish other than the leaf. Nothing could be hidden in it. He looked at the sandwich. The cheese had formed a crispy skirt around the edge of the bread. He picked up a triangle of the sandwich. His hand shook so hard the bread wobbled, but he brought it to his nose. He inhaled. Butter. Bread. Cheese. He took a bite. The crunch echoed in the silent room. Davis held his breath. Sarah closed her eyes, praying. Julian chewed slowly. The warm, salty cheese coated his tongue. The crunch of the sourdough broke through the numbness in his jaw. It wasn't complex. It was honest. He swallowed. He didn't gag. He didn't choke. He dipped the rest of the sandwich into the soup and took another bite. Then another. Then he picked up the spoon. For the first time in 22 days, Julian Thorne was eating. Tears welled up in Davis Thorne's eyes. He put a hand over his mouth to stifle a sob. He watched his son devour the sandwich, then tilt the bowl to scrape out the last of the soup. When the bowl was empty, Julian leaned back against the sofa, a faint flush of color returning to his pale cheeks. He looked at his father, then at Sarah. "Who made this?" Julian asked. His voice was stronger now. The kitchen staff, sir," Sarah stammered. "No," Julian said firmly. "I know Vance's cooking. It tastes like ego. This tasted like care. Bring the person who cooked this to me. Now." Davis turned to Sarah. "You heard him. Bring the chef up here immediately. I want to give him a check for $1 million. Sarah swallowed hard. "Sir, it wasn't the chef. Chef Vance quit an hour ago." "Then who cooked it?" Davis demanded. "It was a waitress, sir. Her name is Lana." Davis blinked. "A waitress?" "Bring her," Julian commanded. He pulled the blanket tighter around himself, but his eyes were sharp, the fog of starvation beginning to lift. "I want to see her." Down in the kitchen, Lana was scrubbing the pot she had used. She was expecting security to come down and escort her out of the building for unauthorized use of company property. The doors burst open, but it wasn't security. It was Davis Thorne himself, flanked by 2 bodyguards and Sarah. The entire kitchen staff froze. Marco dropped a stack of plates. Davis scanned the room until his eyes landed on Lana, who was standing by the sink, suds up to her elbows. "You," Davis said, his voice booming. "You are Lana?" Lana wiped her hands on her apron, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have." "My son ate," Davis interrupted. He walked across the kitchen, his expensive Italian shoes clicking on the tiles, until he stood right in front of her. He looked at this young woman, with her messy hair and tired eyes. "He ate everything," Davis said, his voice breaking with emotion. "You did what the best doctors in the world couldn't do." Lana let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "I'm glad, sir." "Pack your things," Davis said. Lana's face fell. "Am I fired?" "Fired?" Davis let out a short, incredulous laugh. "No, my dear. You are promoted. As of this moment, you are no longer a waitress at this hotel. You are coming with us to the Thorne estate. You are going to be Julian's private chef, and I will pay you 10 times whatever they pay you here." Lana was stunned. "Mr. Thorne, I'm not a professional chef. I don't have a degree." "I don't care about degrees," Davis shouted, turning to the stunned kitchen staff. "I care about results. Get your coat, Lana. The car is waiting." As Lana untied her apron, she felt a pair of eyes on her. She looked toward the back entrance. Chef Vance had returned, likely having forgotten his keys, and was standing in the shadows. He had heard everything. His face was twisted in a mask of pure, venomous jealousy. He watched Lana walk out with the billionaire, his fists clenched at his sides. "This isn't over, dishwasher," Vance muttered to the empty room as the door swung shut. "Nobody humiliates Gordon Vance." The Thorne estate in the Hamptons was not a home. It was a fortress of limestone and glass overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. Lana felt small as the heavy iron gates closed behind the limousine. She was given a room in the staff quarters that was larger than her entire apartment in Queens, yet she felt more isolated than ever. Her first week was a battle of silence. Julian remained locked in his wing of the mansion, refusing to see anyone but his father. Lana was given strict instructions. Leave the food outside the door. Do not knock. Do not speak. But Lana wasn't just a cook. She was a caretaker at heart. She knew that healing required connection, not just calories. On the fourth night, a storm rolled in off the ocean, rattling the windows. Lana was in the industrial-sized kitchen, preparing a late-night meal. She decided against the heavy roasts the house manager had suggested. Instead, she made a rustic chicken pot pie with a biscuit crust. Comfort food, warm and grounding. She walked up to the east wing. Instead of leaving the tray on the floor, she knocked. "Go away," came the muffled voice from inside. "I can't," Lana said through the wood. "The crust will get soggy if you don't eat it now. And I spent 2 hours making the dough by hand." There was a long silence. Then the lock clicked. Julian opened the door. He looked better than he had at the hotel, but he was still dangerously thin. He looked at Lana, then at the steaming pie. "You're stubborn," he muttered, stepping aside. Lana walked into the room. It was dark, illuminated only by the fireplace. She set the tray down on a small table near the fire. My mother always says stubbornness is just persistence with a bad attitude. For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched Julian's lips. He sat down and took a bite. The steam carried the scent of thyme and rosemary. "Why are you doing this?" Julian asked, watching her. "My father pays you to cook, not to babysit." "I'm not babysitting," Lana said softly, sitting on the edge of the ottoman. "I'm feeding you. There's a difference. When people cook for money, they cook for the palate. When you cook for care, you cook for the heart. You're lonely, Julian, and loneliness kills faster than hunger." Julian lowered his fork. He looked at this girl, a waitress who wore no makeup, whose hands were rough from work, yet who possessed a warmth that this cold mansion had never known. Over the next month, a routine formed. Lana didn't just drop off food, she stayed. They ate together. She told him about growing up in Queens, about her mother's dementia, about her dreams of opening a small bakery. Julian spoke of the pressure of being a thorn, the fake friends, the constant fear that people only wanted his name, not him. He began to gain weight. The color returned to his cheeks. He started smiling. He started laughing. But their growing closeness did not go unnoticed. Enter Isabella Sterling. Isabella was the daughter of a banking tycoon, and the woman Davis Thorne had always envisioned as Julian's wife. She was beautiful, sharp as a diamond, and just as cold. She had been traveling during Julian's illness, convenient for someone who hated hospitals, but now that he was recovering, she had returned to stake her claim. She stormed into the kitchen one afternoon, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble. "So," Isabella sneered, looking Lana up and down. "You're the hired help that Julian is so taken with." Lana was kneading dough. She didn't stop. "I'm his private chef, Miss Sterling." "You're a distraction," Isabella hissed. "Julian is fragile. He confuses gratitude with affection. Don't think for a second that a girl who smells like yeast and dishwater belongs in this world. Enjoy the paycheck while it lasts." She turned and left, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. Lana didn't know it yet, but Isabella had already made a phone call to a disgraced chef named Gordon Vance. 2 months passed. Julian was fully recovered. To celebrate, Davis Thorne announced the Thorne Resurrection Gala, a black tie event at the estate with New York's elite in attendance. Davis insisted that Lana cater the event. I want them to taste the food that saved my son, he declared. This was the opportunity Vance and Isabella had been waiting for. Isabella convinced Davis to hire a support team for Lana, claiming the event was too big for one person. The support team was led by none other than Gordon Vance, who had managed to smooth talk his way back into the industry under a consultancy firm. I am here to serve, Vance said, with a slick smile when he entered the kitchen, bowing to Lana. No hard feelings, my dear. You are the boss tonight. Lana was suspicious, but she had no choice. She focused on her menu: elevated comfort food, mini grilled cheeses with tomato bisque shooters, braised short rib sliders, lemon tarts. The night of the gala, the estate was glittering. Julian looked handsome in his tuxedo, but his eyes followed Lana whenever she stepped out of the kitchen. Midway through the event, the highlight was to be served: a saffron seafood stew, Lana's grandmother's recipe. In the kitchen, chaos reigned. Lana was plating the dishes. Vance was hovering near the sauce station. I'll take the sauce out, Vance offered. No, I've got it, Lana said, reaching for the tureen. Nonsense. You greet the guests, Vance insisted, practically pushing her out the swinging doors. Lana walked into the ballroom. Julian beamed at her. He took a microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian announced, silencing the crowd, I am alive today because of one person. Lana Ross. She didn't just feed me, she brought me back to life. The crowd applauded. Isabella stood in the corner, clutching a glass of champagne so hard the stem nearly snapped. Waiters began serving the stew. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. Senator Miller, a close friend of the family, clutched his throat. His face turned bright red. He gasped for air, knocking his table over. He's choking! Someone shouted. No, it's anaphylaxis, a doctor in the crowd yelled. Does this have peanut oil? He's deathly allergic. Lana froze. No, there are no nuts in the kitchen. I banned them specifically. Julian rushed to the senator, who was being injected with an EpiPen by the doctor. The senator stabilized, but the room was in a panic. Davis Thorne turned to Lana, his face purple with rage. You said this was safe. It is, Lana cried. Check the kitchen, Davis roared. Security ran into the kitchen. Moments later, they returned holding a small, empty bottle of concentrated peanut oil. They found it in Lana's personal backpack, tucked inside her locker. We found this in her bag, sir, the head of security said. The room went silent. Vance stepped forward, feigning shock. Oh, Lana, I saw you seasoning the pot near your locker. I didn't think... Oh, my God. Isabella stepped forward, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. It seems the savior wanted a little more fame. Maybe she thought saving a senator would get her a raise. Or maybe she's just incompetent. I didn't do this, Lana screamed, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Julian. Julian, please, you know I wouldn't. Julian looked at the bottle. He looked at his father's fury. He looked at the senator gasping for air. The trauma of his own poisoning came rushing back. The fear, the betrayal. He looked at Lana, and for one heartbreaking second, he hesitated. That hesitation broke her heart. Get her out of here, Davis commanded coldly. And call the police. I want her arrested for reckless endangerment. The holding cell at the NYPD's 19th precinct smelled of stale coffee, industrial bleach, and cold sweat. Lana sat on the metal bench, her knees pulled up to her chest, still wearing her chef's coat from the gala. The white fabric, once a symbol of her pride, was now stained with the chaotic splashes of sauce from when the security guards had dragged her out. She wasn't crying anymore. She had run out of tears hours ago. Now there was only a hollow, ringing silence in her ears. Ross, you're free to go, the desk sergeant grunted, buzzing the heavy door open. Charges were dropped. The Thorne family declined to prosecute. Lucky you. Lana didn't feel lucky. She walked out of the precinct into the blinding flash of paparazzi cameras. Someone had tipped off the press. Lana, did you try to kill Senator Miller? Was it a political hit? Is it true you were sleeping with the heir for money? She shielded her eyes, pushing through the mob, her head down. She didn't have money for a cab. She walked 6 blocks to the subway, the insults fading behind her, but the shame burning into her skin. When she finally reached her mother's small, cramped apartment in Queens, reality set in with a brutal weight. The landlord had already slipped a note under the door, a warning about late rent. Her phone was blowing up with notifications, not from friends, but from social media. She had been dubbed the poison chef. Her career was dead. No restaurant in New York would hire a waitress, let alone a cook, who had nearly killed a U.S. senator. Lana walked into the small kitchen. It was the same kitchen where she had learned to cook, where she had made the soup that saved Julian. She looked at her hands. They were trembling. She opened the cupboard to find it nearly empty, just a box of pasta and a can of beans. She slid down the cabinet door to the linoleum floor and buried her face in her hands. She had touched the sky, lived in a palace, and fallen in love with a prince. Now she was back in the dirt, and the prince believed she was a monster. Back at the Thorne estate, the silence was deafening. 3 days had passed since the gala. The house staff moved like ghosts, afraid to make a sound. Davis Thorne was in damage control mode, fielding calls from lawyers and PR firms to bury the scandal. In the East Wing, the curtains were drawn tight against the afternoon sun. Julian lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The tray of food on his nightstand, lobster bisque, and a Wagyu slider prepared by Gordon Vance, was cold and untouched. The door creaked open. Isabella Sterling glided in, dressed in a sharp white pantsuit that cost more than Lana would earn in a lifetime. She sat on the edge of the bed, her perfume, a heavy floral scent, filling the room. "Julian," she cooed, placing a manicured hand on his shoulder. "You have to eat. You're losing all the progress you made." Julian didn't blink. "I'm not hungry." "Don't be childish. Chef Vance made this specially for you. He's heartbroken over what happened, you know. He feels responsible for letting that woman into his kitchen." At the mention of her, Julian flinched. "She tried to kill Senator Miller. Julian," Isabella continued, her voice dripping with faux concern. "Imagine if she had put that oil in your food. She was playing a long game. She wanted the inheritance. We're just lucky we caught her." Julian turned his head slowly to look at her. His eyes were dull, sunken again. She knew about the allergy. Sociopaths don't care about allergies, darling. They care about chaos. Isabella stood up and smoothed her jacket. "I've arranged for a new menu, and I've moved into the guest suite down the hall. I'm not going to leave you alone until you're well. We're going to get through this, and we're going to be the couple everyone expects us to be." She leaned down and kissed his forehead. It felt like ice. "Eat the slider. For me." When she left, Julian sat up. He looked at the slider. It was perfect. The bun was golden, the meat seared to a precise medium rare. It was technically flawless, but it lacked soul. He pushed the tray away, the nausea rising in his throat. His mind drifted back to the night of the gala. He replayed the moment the security guards pulled the bottle of peanut oil from Lana's backpack. He saw the look of sheer, unadulterated terror in her eyes. "I didn't do this," she had screamed. Julian closed his eyes. He thought about the weeks they spent together. He thought about her habits. Lana was obsessive. She washed her hands until they were raw. She checked labels 3 times, once at the store, once during prep, and once before cooking. It was a compulsion born from caring for her sick mother. She wouldn't make a mistake, Julian whispered to the empty room. And she isn't a killer. If it wasn't a mistake, and it wasn't malice, then it was a setup. A spark of energy, fueled by rage, ignited in his chest. He threw the covers off. His legs were weak, but his resolve was iron. He grabbed his laptop and locked the bedroom door. He didn't search for news articles. He searched for Gordon Vance debt. Nothing. He tried Gordon Vance lawsuits. A few minor labor disputes from years ago. Julian rubbed his temples. He needed to dig deeper. He picked up his burner phone, the one he used to avoid the paparazzi, and dialed a number he hadn't used in 2 years. Russo, a gravelly voice answered on the second ring. "It's Julian Thorne," Julian said. "I need you. Now." Detective Frank Russo met Julian in the back of a tinted SUV parked 3 miles from the estate, near a bleak stretch of coastline. Russo was an ex-NYPD vice cop who worked in the shadows. He didn't ask questions about morality. He only asked for payment. "You look like hell, kid," Russo said, chewing on an unlit cigar. "I need everything you can find on Gordon Vance and Isabella Sterling," Julian said, his voice raspy. "Financials, phone records, emails. Specifically, look for a connection between them." Russo raised an eyebrow. "The fiancé and the chef? That's a spicy theory. You think they framed the girl?" "I don't think," Julian said, his eyes hard. "I know. The peanut oil was found in a sealed pocket of her bag, a pocket she keeps her inhaler in. She would have seen it. Someone planted it there after she put her bag in the locker. The lockers are in the hallway. No cameras? Vance claimed the system malfunctioned that morning." Russo chuckled darkly. "Of course he did. The oldest trick in the book. Give me 24 hours. "You have 12, Julian said. "And Russo, if you find what I think you'll find, I don't just want evidence. I want leverage." 10 hours later, at 2:00 a.m., Julian's phone buzzed. It was an email from Russo. Subject, the smoking gun. Julian opened the attachment. It wasn't just a document, it was a map of corruption. Russo had bypassed the standard bank checks and went straight to the gambling underground. Gordon Vance owed $450,000 to a syndicate in Atlantic City. He was weeks away from having his legs broken. Then, the transfer. 2 days before the gala, a wire transfer of exactly $450,000 cleared into Vance's offshore account in the Caymans. The source was a shell company called Obsidian LLC. Russo had dug further. Obsidian LLC's incorporation papers listed a single director, Isabella Sterling. But the nail in the coffin was a grainy photo attached to the end of the file. Russo had tracked down the supplier of the concentrated peanut oil, a boutique spice shop in Brooklyn. The shop kept digital receipts. The receipt for the oil was time-stamped 9 a.m. on the day of the party. The signature at the bottom was a scrawl, but clear enough. G. Vance. Julian stared at the screen. The betrayal was absolute. The woman he was supposed to marry had paid a desperate man to destroy the woman he loved. They had risked a senator's life just to secure a spot in high society. It was disgusting. It was evil. And it was over. Julian stood up. He felt a surge of adrenaline that banished his hunger. He dressed quickly, pulling on a black hoodie and jeans, abandoning the suits that defined his prison. He grabbed his keys, not for the limousine, but for the vintage Mustang he kept under a tarp in the garage. He roared out of the estate gates, leaving the guards scrambling. He drove toward the city, the skyline glittering in the distance like a mirage. Queens at 3:30 a.m. was a different world from the Hamptons. The streetlights flickered, and the air smelled of exhaust and damp concrete. Julian parked his car in front of the run-down tenement building Russo had identified as Lana's address. He walked up the 4 flights of stairs, the graffiti on the walls mocking his designer shoes. He stood in front of apartment 4B. He could hear the hum of a refrigerator through the thin wood. He knocked. Silence. He knocked again. Harder. "Lana, it's me." A chain rattled. The door opened 2 inches. Lana's face appeared in the crack. She looked wrecked. Her eyes were swollen, red-rimmed from days of crying. She wore an oversized t-shirt, and her hair was a tangled mess. When she saw him, her expression didn't soften. It hardened into something brittle and sharp. "Get away from here," she hissed, moving to slam the door. Julian jammed his foot in the gap. "Lana, please, I know the truth." "The truth?" Lana laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "The truth is that you stood there and watched them drag me away. You hesitated. You, of all people. You know what it's like to be sick, to be scared. And when they called me a poisoner, you didn't say a word." "I was a coward," Julian said, his voice cracking. He didn't fight the door. He just leaned his forehead against the wood. "I was scared. The trauma. It blinded me. But I was wrong. God, Lana, I was so wrong." He slid a piece of paper through the crack in the door. It was the printout of the bank transfer from Isabella to Vance. Lana looked down at the paper. Her hands shook as she picked it up. She read the numbers. She saw the names. The door opened slowly. Lana stood there, clutching the paper, tears streaming down her face again. But this time, they were tears of vindication. "They paid him? She paid him to ruin me?" "Because you were the only thing that made me real," Julian said, stepping into the small, dim hallway. And that terrified them. "Isabella wants a puppet. You wanted a man." He reached out, but he didn't touch her. He let his hand hover, giving her the choice. "I can't undo the last 3 days. I can't undo the humiliation, but I can promise you this. I am going to burn their world to the ground. I have the evidence. I have the police ready." Lana looked at him. She saw the gauntness in his cheeks. He hadn't eaten since she left. She saw the fire in his eyes. "I don't just want them arrested, Julian," Lana whispered, her voice trembling with a newfound fury. "They took my name. They took my dignity. I want them to look me in the eye when they lose everything." "Then help me," Julian said. "My father is hosting a reconciliation dinner tomorrow night. He thinks I'm going to propose to Isabella. I want you to be the one who serves the final course." Lana wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at the small, peeling kitchen behind her, then back at the billionaire who had driven into the slums to find her. "I'll need a dress," she said, her voice steadying. "And a kitchen." "You'll have the best of both," Julian vowed. "Pack your knives, chef. We have a dinner service to prep." The reconciliation dinner was designed to be the event of the season, a masterclass in public relations orchestrated by Davis Thorne. The great hall of the estate had been transformed. Thousands of white orchids cascaded from the ceiling, and the table was set with the family's Romanov-era silverware. It was a theater of lies. At the head of the table sat Davis, looking relieved that the unpleasantness with the waitress was over. To his right sat Isabella Sterling, resplendent in emerald silk, her hand resting possessively on Julian's forearm. Her parents, Richard and Catherine Sterling, sat opposite, already discussing the merger of their banking empire with Thorne Real Estate, as if it were a done deal. "To the happy couple," Richard Sterling boomed, raising a crystal flute of vintage champagne, "and to the restoration of order." Julian sat in silence. He was wearing a tuxedo, but unlike the other nights, he didn't look like a mannequin. His eyes were sharp, scanning the room with the precision of a predator waiting for the wind to shift. He hadn't touched his wine. "Julian," Isabella whispered, her nails digging slightly into his sleeve. "Daddy is toasting us. Don't be rude." Julian slowly picked up his glass. He looked at the golden liquid, then at Isabella. He didn't drink. He poured the champagne onto the pristine white tablecloth. The liquid spread like a stain. The table went deadly silent. "Julian?" Davis asked, his voice warning. "What are you doing?" "I don't drink with liars," Julian said. His voice was calm, but it carried to the back of the room. "And I certainly don't marry them." Isabella laughed nervously. "Oh, he's just tired. The stress of the last few days." "I have never been more awake," Julian interrupted. He pushed his chair back and stood up. "I wasn't happy with the menu tonight, Father. Chef Vance's cooking leaves a bad taste in my mouth. It tastes like desperation. So I took the liberty of hiring a specialist for the final course." "A specialist?" Davis frowned. "Vance is a Michelin star chef. Who could you possibly—" The double doors to the kitchen swung open. The room's collective breath hitched. Lana Ross stepped into the light. She was no longer the girl in the oversized uniform, smelling of dishwater and fear. She was wearing a floor-length gown of crimson velvet that Julian had bought her hours ago. Her hair was swept up, revealing the elegant curve of her neck, and her makeup was fierce. But it was her eyes that held the room captive. They blazed with a cold, righteous fire. She walked toward the table not as a servant, but as an executioner. Gordon Vance, who had been standing by the sideboard to accept compliments on the roast, dropped his ladle. The clatter echoed like a gunshot. "What is she doing here?" Isabella shrieked, jumping to her feet. "Security! Get her out! She's a criminal!" "Sit down, Isabella," Julian commanded. The authority in his voice was absolute. It wasn't the voice of a boy. It was the voice of a man who owned the room. "Father," Julian said, turning to Davis, "you taught me that in business you always follow the money." "So I did." Lana reached the table. She didn't look at Davis or the Sterlings. She looked directly at Isabella. She placed a sleek, black tablet on the table in front of Davis. "Press play, Mr. Thorne," Lana said. Her voice was steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "See what your future daughter-in-law bought with her allowance." Davis looked from Lana to Julian, then down at the tablet. He tapped the screen. The video that played was grainy, shot on a cell phone in a dimly lit alley behind the estate. It showed Gordon Vance, sweating and jittery, handing a small amber bottle to a young busboy. The audio crackled. "Put this in the girl's bag," Vance's voice hissed on the recording. "Deep in the side pocket. Do it, and the $3,000 I owe you for the poker game is wiped clean." "What is it?" the busboy asked. "Just peanut oil. It won't kill anyone if it stays in the bag. It's just insurance to get the little rat fired." The video ended. Davis Thorne's face drained of color. He looked up at Vance, who was backing away toward the kitchen door, his face slick with sweat. "But that's not all," Julian said, throwing a dossier onto the table. The papers fanned out, revealing bank statements. Vance didn't do it for free. He did it because he owed $500,000 to the mob. And guess who paid off that debt 2 days before the gala? Julian pointed a shaking finger at Isabella. "A shell company registered to Isabella Sterling," Julian roared. "She paid him to frame Lana. She risked the life of a United States senator. She risked my life, just to protect her ego." Isabella's composure shattered. "It was for you," she screamed, tears streaming down her face, ruining her mascara. "She was stealing you. She's a nobody, a waitress. I am a Sterling. I did what had to be done to save this family." "You didn't save this family." Davis stood up, his voice trembling with a rage that shook the crystal glasses. "You nearly destroyed it. You used my son's trauma as a weapon." "Davis, please," Richard Sterling stammered, standing up. "Let's not be hasty. Surely this is a misunderstanding." "Get out," Davis said, his voice low and dangerous. "Davis, I said get out!" Davis bellowed, slamming his fist on the table. "And take your criminal daughter with you before I have the security team throw you off the balcony." "I'm afraid they can't leave just yet," Julian said calmly. Sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder by the second. Blue and red lights flashed through the high windows, painting the room in chaotic strobes. "I called the police 10 minutes ago," Julian said. "Conspiracy to commit murder, tampering with food, fraud. I think you'll be dining in a cell tonight, Isabella." Gordon Vance bolted. He shoved a waiter aside and sprinted for the service exit. "Not this time," Lana said. As Vance burst through the doors, he ran straight into the chest of the head of security, who had been briefed by Julian. Vance was tackled to the ground, screaming obscenities. Police officers swarmed the dining room. The Sterlings were shouting about lawyers. Isabella was sobbing, clinging to her mother, as an officer read her rights and clicked the handcuffs onto her wrists. Through the chaos, Julian walked around the table. He stopped in front of Lana. The room was a whirlwind of shouting and flashing lights, but in that small circle of space between them, it was quiet. "Are you okay?" Julian asked softly. Lana looked at Isabella being led away, her head hung low. She looked at the table where the spilled champagne was still dripping onto the floor. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I'm finally okay." Davis Thorne approached them. The billionaire looked older than he ever had. He looked at Lana, really looked at her, and saw the dignity she possessed, a dignity that money hadn't bought and poverty hadn't broken. "Miss Ross," Davis said, his voice humble. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I owe you an apology, a profound one. I judged you by your uniform, not your character, and I almost lost my son because of it." "You were protecting him," Lana said, her voice kind but firm. "But you need to learn that not everyone wants your money, Mr. Thorne. Some of us just want to be happy." Davis nodded slowly. "I see that now. If there is anything at all that I can do to make this right." Lana looked at Julian. They shared a smile that spoke of a future waiting to be written. "Actually," Lana said, "I have an idea for a foundation." 6 months later, the grand opening of the Thorne and Ross Culinary Academy in Queens was the biggest event of the year, but there were no tuxedos, no caviar, and definitely no pretension. The guest list included local families, aspiring chefs from the neighborhood, and kids who had never held a proper chef's knife in their lives. The air smelled of fresh basil, roasting garlic, and hope. Lana stood at the front of the demonstration kitchen, wearing a chef's coat that finally had her name embroidered on the chest. Executive Chef Lana Ross. "Cooking isn't about impressing people," Lana told the class of 20 teenagers watching her every move. "It's about connecting with them. It's about taking simple ingredients and turning them into a memory. Never forget that." In the back of the room, leaning against the wall, Julian watched her. He looked healthy, vibrant, and happier than he had ever been. He wasn't running the real estate empire today. He was running the dish pit, and he loved every minute of it. As the class ended and the students filed out, chattering excitedly, Julian walked up to the counter. "Chef," he said, grinning, "I have a complaint about the menu." Lana wiped her hands on a towel, smiling. "Oh, really? And what is the complaint, Mr. Thorne?" "It's missing something sweet," Julian said. He walked around the counter. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Lana's breath hitched. Julian. He didn't kneel. He stood eye to eye with her, treating her as his equal, his partner, his savior. "You saved my life with a grilled cheese sandwich," Julian said, his eyes shining. "You taught me how to trust again. I don't want to eat a single meal without you for the rest of my life." "Lana, will you marry me?" Lana looked around the kitchen she had dreamed of, then at the man who had made it possible. "Yes," she whispered, tears of joy spilling over. "Yes, chef." He kissed her, and for a moment the world tasted perfect. And that is how a humble waitress took down a corrupt dynasty and healed a broken heart, all with the power of honesty and a little bit of tomato soup, while Isabella and Chef Vance are now serving long sentences behind bars, eating cafeteria slop that definitely isn't Michelin star quality. Julian and Lana are building a legacy of love and charity in Queens. It just goes to show that true wealth isn't about what's in your bank account, but who is sitting at your dinner table. What did you think of Isabella's punishment? Did she get what she deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story warmed your heart, please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss a drama-filled story. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.